policy. And an update from Rachel and her team, so I'll hand across to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to introduce Sarah Loader. Sarah is a senior business analyst in my area and has been my right hand on this work. So I want to thank her and have her here to introduce to you.
No. Welcome.
We also are just sending a new Zoom link to Laura Belby from Rice Spear. I just asked her to be on standby in case you had any questions that she can answer for you. But today I just wanted to take you through what is, won't take too long, it's an internal policy for Napier City Council around our compliance and enforcement practices. And it's a policy that, excuse me, it's an operational document and it would be very much, it's non-binding on council. We have discretion as a council as to what we choose to enforce unless it's unless it is fully legislated. We can choose what things we wish to enforce and what we don't against all the legislations that we have responsibility for. And we have discretion about what enforcement actions we take. So this policy is used basically to provide guidance for us to in exercising that discretion. And it will be updated when either our legislation or our practice changes. So there's two parts to this, and I'll step you through it and then we can have a chat about it. So this is, there are three documents and or three components to this policy. One is the external policy. Then we have an internal guidance for our staff who are involved in compliance and regulatory work. And then we will be undertaking some internal training for our staff as well so that they know how to apply this policy. And as I mentioned, it is non-binding and it's sort of a changeable document. So why have it? Well, we need to ensure that our enforcement decision-making is proportionate, that we're consistent in our decision-making, that we're treating our regulated parties fairly and appropriately. We need to be sure that we are helping regulated parties, and that could be regulated sectors or individuals, companies or organisations. We need to ensure that they know what's expected of them if they were to be non-compliant and subject of an investigation, and that they understand the process that we take and how we reach our decisions and the things we take into account when we take enforcement decisions. And of course, it helps promote transparency of our regulatory activities to our community. There's sort of three principles I wanted to talk about, and I've sort of covered them, but it's important in terms of compliance and enforcement work that we're appropriately fair, reasonable and proportionate. And what I mean by proportionate is that the level of enforcement action we take is proportionate to the compliance or the activity, non-compliance or activity that the person or the organisation undertook. That we apply a fair approach and we use our discretion justifiably. And that, as I said, parties are treated fairly but also with impartiality. We need to be efficient and responsive in our investigative work. Sometimes we have legislative timelines that we work to, and other times it's just appropriate that we work as quickly as we can when we're undertaking an investigation for the benefit of all parties. And our decisions need to be evidence-based. They have to be free from bias and prejudices, and they must be based on the evidence that we collect through an investigation. So the model that we have chosen, there are a number of compliance models or regulatory models available and around for use by different regulatory agencies, both in central and local government. But the one that I think works best for us, given the breadth of legislations and bylaws that we do administer, is the VAID model. And if you think about it, probably the next slide is kind of help you to understand that a little bit more. But if you think about that most people are willing to comply and want to comply. It's good for their business and it's good for them. And so it's about giving information and advice to them to help them to comply. The next level is just need some more assistance to help them to comply, and then moving all the way up where we would have to use the full extent of the law to require someone to comply. And you can see that, you know, at the top of the pyramid, we're talking about the smallest group of those who we regulate. The majority are really willing to comply. So that's sort of the VADE model, and like I said, it has been used in councils and it has been used in central government as well. So the external policy document that you have is an overview of the enforcement approach and decision-making principles. It's really what's involved in an investigation generally, and the factors that we consider when we make decisions and the enforcement tools that we might use. So I think it's good. The reason that we've brought this to you, even though this is sort of an internal guidance document, is that we want to put this policy out publicly because we think it really helps our regulated parties to understand how we do this. And it's really good, I think, for you to know it and understand it, and you can direct people to it on the website if you have any questions or concerns about it from the people that you represent. And then the internal guidance.
I have a question from Keith.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Do you keep a database with all the people's names on it and whether they've been warned or what's taken place?
We certainly have records of past non-compliance by individuals, but we don't keep lists or anything like that. But we have obviously where we've taken an enforcement action, which could be as simple as writing out a compliance advice letter to say we've had a complaint. You know, we're letting you know that that we've received this complaint, and that this is how you need to comply. So that would be on our records, right through to any prosecution records or anything that we might have done in the courts.
So if someone receives a warning, you've got a record of that?
Yes.
And how long do you keep those records for?
Well, we keep them for as long as our systems will allow us to keep them.
Okay.
We don't get rid of them or anything like
Okay.
that. But past compliance is a consideration when you're thinking about what enforcement tool you might want to use. If you're dealing with an organisation or a person who has had repeated non-compliance previously, that's a really important decision-making tool as to what your next step is.
Okay.
So it is really important that we keep those records.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and
Thank you.
that leads on to this is that there is a number of factors we need to consider when we make enforcement decisions. One of the ones we think about is the level of harm or risk that's posed or that has occurred. So in some cases you might have some non-compliance that hasn't manifested into harm yet, but it could do. For example, if you think about safe food handling practices, if we are doing site visits on a premise and they are not following safe food handling practices, there's a potential of harm to our community. Versus, say, if there's been an outbreak of food poisoning, then we know the harm has occurred, that sort of thing. So it's about keeping our community safe and understanding what's the extent of that harm. Then the culpability, so this is, to your point, Councillor Price, is that if someone really has done something quite accidental or one-off, then we want to work with that party as much as we can to help them to comply and to understand their compliance requirements. But if we're talking about deliberate and ongoing behaviours, then it's more likely we're going to go up that pyramid in terms of our enforcement response. Another one is their willingness to comply. So are they working with us and have they already themselves put in actions to improve their practices so that non-compliant doesn't happen again? That goes a long way to our consideration of what we might do, because ultimately everything we do, we just want to get compliance. So if people have already come to that realisation and working towards that themselves, and that's good. versus, and they need to have the means to comply as well. So they may be willing, but their organisation or whatever is not set up to actually be compliant, and that's the sort of factor we'd have to take into account. And some of these things are, it's on a sliding scale. So you might have a situation where someone has acted ignorantly, unintentionally. They may have done something where they have no past compliance issues, and they've been fine, and they've just done something. But the actual seriousness of what they've done, the harm that caused to our community, or the risk of that harm to our community, might be at such a scale that you might go further up the pyramid even as your first intervention. So you use this as a bit of a guide. And then once you've sort of worked through what is the probably appropriate level, then you think about public interest factors. Public interest factors are really determined. So the Solicitor General has clear public interest factors that we must take into account before we take enforcement action. But we can also think about things like that are relevant to our community particularly, and to your council priorities. If something is a recurring and ongoing problem for our community, we may consider the public interest to be higher than perhaps what the Solicitor General guidelines suggest. And we may consider that to our decision making. And then the internal guidance really is to provide, ensure that teams understand who's responsible for which compliance issues. We have a wide range of legislations and bylaws. What level should those decisions be made at? When things should be escalated, at what point in an investigation should things be escalated or notified? And that's particularly if you think about high public interest matters, they need to be escalated up to a senior level or to the CE quite quickly. And then, of course, prosecution decisions. We're looking to set up what we call a Compliance and Enforcement Panel, or CEP. And that would be made up of senior managers who are in regulatory and compliance functions, and they would look to receive the investigation reports from the investigators and then look to these criteria and start making some decisions around how they would, what enforcement action they'd look to take. And for prosecutions, that decision would remain with the CE. So following this, as I said, we'll undertake training for our staff so they understand the policy and our expectations in terms of how they apply that. And then we'll put the public policy, the external policy, on our website. So happy to take any questions on this.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. If central government passes some legislation that we have to enforce, do we get any assistance from central government in the costs and resourcing of that enforcement?
No, not usually, but often, sometimes if the government wants to regulate a particular industry, then they might, within that legislation, allow for fees to be paid by that industry for that regulation. So if you think about Food Act or Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, the fees for us to do that regulatory work come to us, and that funds that activity.
Oh, yeah. My question is about the evidence-based part of this. When you're talking about word of mouth, so someone comes to you and they say something's happened, how do you deal with that? How can you back that up as evidence?
Would treat that as a complaint like anything else, and it would have to be investigated. Yeah. So it is, it's just going to steer our compliance people into looking into something. Basically, it would be the first indicator of non-compliance, and then we would have to investigate and make sure that we can corroborate that claim.
And just further to that, what kind of evidence is good to have?
Gosh, evidence is a huge subject, and there is levels of evidence. You can have evidence that is more circumstantial, or you can have direct evidence, and of course the courts prefer direct evidence over circumstantial evidence. So we try and investigate and collect all of the information that we can and form out the best picture of what we think's happened. It is just understanding what are the facts of the case, and if we can establish those facts through the best evidence we can, then that will give weight to whether we take a case to court or not. Yeah.
Linda.
I noticed in the annual plan that you didn't, I noticed in the food safety line, since it's my background, you didn't have a full team of people. Has that come back on board? Because I know it was affecting your compliance monitoring and you were only monitoring high-risk food businesses.
Yeah, I mean, like all teams, we have times when, you know, it's difficult to recruit or we lose key staff. The good thing is, like you suggested, is you fall back to a risk-based approach. So our requirements for monitoring that are set out in our annual plan are sort of the perfect situation. And then if we fall short of that, we fall quickly into that risk-based approach. So any high-risk premises get done. That means any premises that have had inspections in the past and may not have met the requirements, they then go on a more frequent inspection process. And until they've had a long period of compliance, they stay on that frequent inspection process until they're rectified it. So risk-based approach sort of compliance work is probably the best option anyway, and that you are targeting your resources and your time into the things that are causing the most harm or the most risk to your community. So it's good to fall back to that, but it's when we do have full complement of staff, then we can deliver on the rest of it.
I guess one of the issues is that people know that we haven't got enough staff, so they become a little bit complacent about what they do. And I mean, it's very big news at the moment what happened in Christchurch with that the university and things like that. And we don't really think not that we've got a university, but we've certainly got some places that feed a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's just
it's a good point, and we can have other triggers are when food premises change hands. So some operators, say, for example, might have had a really good track record, and our environmental health team know everyone. They know all of the business owners. They know them really well. And often when we see a change of hands, that will trigger an earlier inspection. So any sort of indicators that, we would definitely focus and prioritise those areas.
Places too, wouldn't they?
New places, yes, go on to a fast inspection plan. Yes.
Just out of interest.
Max.
How often do we take people to court, and what kinds of things is it for?
How often? In the time I've been doing this, 7 years, probably our most frequent area is in the animal control space for dog control matters. We have been to court for RMA matters, and in some cases one case was was a prosecution, and one was seeking enforcement orders. So enforcement orders are asking the Environment Court to require a person to do something, basically. So it is the last thing we want to do. It's costly, it's time consuming, the evidence levels are high, and it's not something that we want to do at all. We would rather work with people and businesses and work on their compliance and make sure that they can be compliant. But where we should and where it's appropriate to do so, we will prosecute if we have to. And sometimes that can be to basically require people to do what they need to do, or it could be to say we take this really seriously, and any of these sorts of behaviours, we're always going to take this to that level of seriousness. Yeah.
Richard.
Potentially a long-winded one for you. What are the different activities that you're regulating and could get into this? You've mentioned animal control and some of the other ones. Throw a list at us of what you're actually monitoring and looking at.
Yeah, okay. I think in your internal guidance paper, I think there's a long list there. Is it the internal guidance paper? Oh, yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Here we go. So you'll know some of the frequent ones, Building Act, the Resource Management Act, and there's 2 local government acts, Biosecurity Act, the Food Act and food regulations, the Litter Act, Dog Control Act, Health Act, Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, and hazardous substances and new organisms Act, and then of course all of the 1819 bylaws that council has.
Any further questions? No? Oh, well, thank you very much, team. Really useful to have that understanding of that operational policy, and I'm sure your team will continue to do great work in that space. It's never easy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that's us now until 2 o'clock. And we'll be back for the council meeting, so free to go and enjoy some fresh air and sunshine.